Next, I'll provide a brief overview of compliance with the 13 bodies of federal environmental law that are covered under 24 CFR Part 58.5. The levels of review that require 58.5 compliance are categorically excluded, subject to 58.5 environmental assessments and environmental impact statements. While all NEPA levels of environmental review, including exemption and category excluded, not subject to 58.5, require compliance with the 3 bodies of law of airport hazards, coastal barrier resources, and flood insurance, the levels of review, the 3 I just discussed on the previous slide, also require compliance with these 13 bodies of federal environmental review. Due to time constraints today, we're not going into them in any great detail. Information for them is available on the HUD HRE site under other laws and authorities, and I've got links to that on the DCO OCD Environmental Materials website. If you'll note, just as they're listed alphabetically here, except for environmental justice, they're listed the same way on the category exclusion and environmental assessment forms. HUD does that for a reason. HUD's guidance that they and regulations provide that you cannot review environmental justice until you've documented the first 12 of these and then the other 3 laws that I just mentioned, once, on affected populations within the community. Once you've done that documentation, then and only then may you use the EJ View system to document that this project will not have an adverse impact or a disproportionate adverse impact on covered populations of minorities and low-income members. The grantee must certify that it's complied with and will continue to comply with throughout the project the laws and authorities cited at section 58.5, must consider the criteria, standards, policies, and regulations of these laws and authorities, and must provide written documentation of compliance or no compliance requiring compliance with each law or authority. Next, we'll discuss ensuring public participation in the NEPA decision-making process. This is required for completing a category excluded subject to 58.5 review that does not convert to exempt or an environmental assessment level review. The reasons for public participation, it's the public's right under NEPA. Public input can improve the quality of a project and can resolve differences that could otherwise stop or delay a project. The types of public notices to be used under Part 58 and sample templates of which are available on the DCO OCD Environmental Materials website are the Notice of Intent to Request Release of Funds, the NOI RROF. Those are required for projects that are category excluded, not converting to exempt, an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, and the Notice of Finding of No Significant Impact, the FONSI, which is required for an environmental assessment. For an environmental assessment review only, which requires a FONSI, the FONSI notice may be combined with the NOI RROF notice into one longer notice to save the grantee time and the expenses of 2 separate publications. The Notice of Intent to Request Release of Funds publication requires 7 full days following a publication or 10 full days following its posting. The combined Notice of Intent to Request Release of Funds and FONSI notice requires 15 full days for publication or following publication and dissemination, or 18 full days following posting and dissemination. For the required comment periods following a public notification, the comment period starts the day after the date of publication or posting and lasts until the close of business on the 7th or the 10th day for the NOI ROF, or the 15th or the 8th full day after the combined FONSI Notice of Intent to Request Release of Funds publication or posting. Again, if you publish, it's a shorter time period. If you post locally in 3 places and disseminate in case of the FONSI, it's 3 additional days, depending on the type of notice. A notice of intent to request release of funds, or FONSI, or the combination, publication or posting cannot be combined with a final floodplain and or wetlands publication, and that's contradicts guidance we were given previously, but for the last 2 years at least, we have said those have to be separate. So there's no overlap between comment periods. So if an 8-step floodplain or wetlands review is required as part of your environmental review, you have to have those 2 full comment periods done and over with before you can consider your category exclusion or your environmental assessment is complete and publish or post its final publication, the notice of intent to request release of funds and or the FONSI. Some general public notification good housekeeping measures. The FONSI for an environmental assessment must also be disseminated to interested parties as defined by HUD on or before the day of publication or posting. There should be a listing below of some interested parties. If a notice is posted, it must be prominently displayed in at least 3 local locations available to the public. If feasible, one should be posted at the project site. That's rare for our state CDBG projects. It's more common in large urban areas for direct entitlement CDBG construction projects. We've been asked before for some examples for posting sites. The post office, village hall, city hall, township hall, the county courthouse, the police station, the Good Neighbor shopping center bulletin board, a tavern, a bowling alley, they're all frequently in times other than COVID. Those have all been used in the past, and HUD has deemed those to be acceptable. For publications and postings both, you need to use applicable language for your publication or posting. That is, you should reflect the languages used in your community's composition. It's rare, but downstate we're getting an increasingly diverse population as well. Responsible entity must consider comments from the public prior to signature by the chief elected official on the request for release of funds form, and you will mitigate or not following the public comments. So there may be additional mitigations you incorporate into your category exclusion or your environmental assessment after the public has commented, and say the grantees board decides to incorporate some mitigations based on what they've heard from their local residents. This is HUD's all-encompassing list of interested parties that should receive a copy of the publication template for a FONSI on or before the date it is published or posted. Generally, you'll document that to me. You'll attach a letter from you as a preparer or from the community saying we've sent a copy to you as the state's environmental review officer in place of HUD. We've sent a copy to the Chicago Regional Office of the US EPA and the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, because they gave us the courtesy of sending us a letter saying they had no objection to the project. So therefore we'll send them a courtesy copy of the FONSI template. You can ask, about the others, and I can give more detailed information, but generally if you have the 3 I just discussed, for the state's purposes, that's all that's been required the last several years. The timing and counting of days for environmental publication comment periods. HUD gave guidance in our last training 4 years ago that they're recommending we use business days. However, the actual regulations say calendar days, which can be shorter. So you can count the publication comment days in calendar days. The grantee starts counting the day after the publication or posting of the notice. If the last day of a comment period falls on a weekend or a holiday, you should accept, the community should accept public comments received through the following business day as a courtesy to the community. The community may extend the comment period for any reason, but must extend it as needed per section 58.46. The grantee's chief elected official signs and submits the request for release of funds as part of the overall environmental record review only after the last day of the comment period, which is should be the on or about day stated at the start of the notice. Here's an example that HUD provided to us in training of say a FONSI NOI RROF publication period. You would start the publication period, in this case, on the second day of the month because it was published on the first day of the month. The last full day of the public comment period would be the 16th of the month. The on or about date should be stated as the 17th of the month or later, and that would assure you 15 full days of local public comment period. No matter what level of review, you'll submit the entire environmental review record to your DCO, OCD environmental review officer, including for exemptions or category excluded, not subject to 58.5. These clearance steps that I'm going to discuss include the additional steps required for the category excluded subject to 58.5 that can't convert to exempt, or the environmental assessment. Once your local public comment period is finished for the category excluded subject to 58.5 or environmental assessment level review, at least one full day later, the chief elected official will sign and date the HUD 7015.15 request for release of funds form that you have prepared for him or her. Then that request for release of funds form is submitted to the DCO as part of the entire environmental record review. Once it's turned in and the state's objection period has been done, DCO will issue the environmental release letter signed by our deputy director in place of the governor as the state's responsible official. The HUD Form 7015.15 is required for submittal for each category excluded, not converting to exempt, or environmental assessment level reviews. You must use the current non-expired form. There are Illinois CDBG specific PI, EDPI, and housing rehab tier 1 versions available on our environmental materials website. This is the legal document, and its pre-filled language should not be changed. When completing the form, the location of the project must be included, including GPS coordinates if available in box 10. Please also include the project's county. So for example, the project is being done in Macomb. You would put Macomb, McDonough County, IL, and the zip code. In box 11, you complete the project description, including its estimated total project cost, where the funding sources are coming from, the amounts of those funding sources, and its estimated construction start and ending months and years. Once your community's entire environmental record review has been completed and documented, you will scan and email or mail a color copy of the entire environmental record review. Keep the original in your files. We just need the copy. We don't, if something should get lost in the transmission, we don't want it permanently lost. You will send that to your respective CDBG environmental review officer. That is me for public infrastructure, economic development, public infrastructure, economic development, or non-housing rehab RLF closeout funding. CARA COZAD will receive the environmental record reviews for all housing rehabilitation projects. When submitting an environmental record review for an environmental assessment or a CEST not converting to exempt review, please be sure and include the HUD 1715.15 signed, dated, and completed correctly, and a copy of the actual publication or posting, as well as the proof of publication or posting. If it's published, that means the publisher's certification. And if the newspaper article is rolled over, you need to unroll it. And if you have to cut it and put it on separate pages, that's fine, but just make sure to have the publisher's certificate. For the posting, it'd be a copy of the template, and it would also be a letter from the chief elected official on the grantee's letterhead stating when the posting was made and on what date the posting was taken down, and what 3 or more prominent public locations it was made to. And if it's a FONSI, you would also include the letter detailing which entities received copies of the FONSI publication, including me here at DCO on behalf of HUD. Under NEPA, DCO in place of HUD has a 15-day objection period following the submission of a completed environmental assessment or CST not converting to exemption environmental record review. These are the 5 reasons that a member of the public or another organization can use to object to the environmental record review submitted. Please note that due to both COVID constraints, COVID-related duties, and other programmatic assignments adopted by our division, environmental record reviews by your humble environmental review officer are taking almost 2 months to complete at this time. I'm hoping that number will go down in the next 2 months to try and get it back to the optimum 15 days. But until that time, as always, I will backdate the environmental release letter for a review with an objection period to the day after the end of the objection period. If the level of review is exemption, category excluded, not subject to 58.5, or category excluded, subject to 58.5, that converts to exempt, once I've made that review, the environmental release date will be backdated to the chief elected official's certifying date on the environmental review form. DCO may ask for the republication, reposting, and redissemination and resubmission if the notice periods locally were too short, the chief elected official signed the request for release of funds prior to the end of the local public comment period, the request for release of funds was completed inaccurately, or there's a long lapse between the notice, the final publication or posting, and submission of the request to release of funds form to DCO, which is the on or about date. The last couple of rounds of PI grants, as we've continued to get used to these regulations and procedures that we've now been doing for 8 years, there's been occasions where I've asked HUD to allow a teachable moment on some for newer administrators or newer ERR preparers. However, if you're a repeat submitter, it's basically going to be, I'm sorry, but this environmental record review is canceled. You're going to have to republish and resubmit the entire environmental record review following correction and republication. We do not want to get in trouble with HUD OEE. So if you're a new administrator, new ERR preparer, and you make such an error, I will see what I can do with HUD, but I can't guarantee they'll say, call it a teachable moment and let them proceed. Now, some basic post-environmental record review actions. Any mitigations or contingencies identified in your environmental review must be transmitted to applicable parties and included into agreements and contracts. That specifically means if you have formal mitigations for constructions, you need to include those in your bid packets going out to potential bidders, and they must be included in the contract documents. And say a species, the mitigation involves a species that's going to move through your work site at a particular time, and DNR says you can't do construction during these 3 months. Well, then that has to be written in the contract and adhered to. You can't, construction cannot occur at that site during those 3 months, because DNR would have the right to request money back that we would send to HUD. It's rare, but it happens. But make sure, the contractor, it's covered at the pre-construction conference, and that the workers know, here's what you need to look out for these particular species. It is required because the grantee's chief elected official has certified that when they submitted the request for release of funds form. The environmental review officer or the project's grant manager can verify through monitoring, periodic spot check, and through verification of the pre-construction conference documents. In conclusion, the correct application of 24 CFR Part 58 is essential for avoiding sanctions, litigations, and unexpected mitigations, remediations, and refunds to the state to refund to HUD. Please follow all required steps in the environmental review and decision-making process, and document your compliance with NEPA, its related laws and authorities, and state of Illinois specific requirements, such as DNR EcoCat or the IEPA clearance letter, which covers both federal and state in the case of the latter requirements. Exercise due diligence when investigating specific bodies of law and their documentation, and don't be arbitrary or capricious, and carefully maintain the environmental record review for as long as you are required to maintain the grant file. I truly appreciate your patience during this lengthy presentation. If you have questions on completing or submitting your environmental record review and your project is public infrastructure, please get a hold of me, and please be patient. I will answer every email and every voice message left, but sometimes it may take a few days, but I will get back to you. If it's a housing rehabilitation related environmental question, please refer those to Kara. For public infrastructure or economic development public infrastructure, environmental questions should come to me and not to your grant manager. Similarly, I don't need to know about clearance of other special grant conditions identified in the NOSAF, but I will do all I can to help you prepare and complete your PI-related environmental record review. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.